This is Leisha Holmes and I'm your host on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast. And as you know, if you're tuning in for the first time or whether you've listened before, we are a global community here at the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast, but we have a first. We have never, ever invited anybody on before that has come from basically this country, which is Lithuania. And I'm delighted to welcome the most wonderful, vivacious guest who's going to give some real insights that I think every listener is going to take something from today. This is Erika Zeigyte, who is the founder and CEO of Prosana. Welcome to you today, Erika. How are you?
Well, thank you for a nice introduction. Very well pronounced surname. I'm doing extremely well. Thank you. Thank you for asking. I hope you're doing well as well.
I'm doing well. And for anyone listening that has anything other than a monosyllabic name, we take pride when we have unusual names in making sure when we meet other people who have unusual or difficult to pronounce names that we get it right. So there you go. Exactly. But it's very nice. Now, obviously, we've only just met today, really. We've been chatting on LinkedIn for a while, but tell our community who you are and what your business does.
Well, first of all, I'm a human being, a very kind, I think, human being. But if we're talking about professional life, I am the founder of Prosana. And Prosana is, well, it's a mix. It's a bit of a consulting and recruitment in one. But we have one big mission in life. We want to help people find purpose at work. And that means that we want people to find joy at work. Either that's through finding them the right job or helping companies find the right people so they get, satisfaction being in their role, like the founders and so on, or we do that through consulting. So yeah, we basically help people find joy at work again.
Oh my God, can we just pause, everybody? I didn't know you were going to say that. And I'm like beaming away here because to me, being human is about finding joy in anything we do, whether it's this cup of tea that I'm currently enjoying, whether it's speaking to people in your job, going for a run, listening to a podcast, whatever it might be. I love that that's your purpose. Wow. That's made me go. Thank you. So thank you so much for joining us. And just in terms of your transition to setting up your own business, because I want to contextualize it. What made you set up Prosana? What was the route to that?
Well, the route was actually very unexpected. I mean, I always knew I would like to try entrepreneurship, but I didn't want to just try it for the sake of trying it. As you know, I did my degree in neuroscience. Actually, that was the moment when I realized that as much as I like, the brains, the thinking behind every decision people make, I actually realized that I love working with people, and science is very much with animals and pets and doing experiments. So then I realized actually I want to go into more like into the work where I have a chance to work with people. So unexpectedly I joined a digital marketing agency that was fully remote, international, even before the whole COVID thing happened. And from there on, I realized that I can actually enjoy building something from scratch and building like teams, building organizations, finding people. And that's basically how it all began. And at some point, you reach the state where you want to help more people, more companies. And that's how I founded Prosana.
And I'd just like to say, for those listening up in Edinburgh, that's where you studied for 5 years, I believe. That's where you did your degree.
Yes. So, hi to everyone from Edinburgh.
Hello. Absolutely one of my favourite cities on earth. There's no question about it. So actually, well, let's focus on that then. You did that as your degree, and you've just talked there about making decisions. So without too much jargon, because we don't want to lose people, we don't want people to sort of go switch off. How do we make the best decisions during an interview process? Let's keep it recruitment focused. How do we make the best decisions, whether that's as a job seeker or as a hiring employer?
It's actually a very broad question. I actually probably that's one question I was a bit like, it's very tricky to answer because it really depends on each situation. I would say, well, first of all, we always make decisions based on experience that we had. We always make decisions based on what we identified are the non-negotiables, the must-have criteria for any position. So I would say these are like the two most important things, but really there's so many variables. Sometimes, we make a decision simply because the moon was in the right place in the sky, or something else. And it's sometimes even hard to explain why I made this decision in the first place. And you either get extremely lucky or you don't. So it's really hard to explain this. It's like, there's so many factors. I would say experience is a big one. Then also, requirements that we have at hand, the knowledge that we have, the information about the candidate that we have, that also influences how we make it.
And also for the candidate, your non-negotiables might be the salary because you need to pay your mortgage. It might be location because you have to get a train or a bus or whatever to work. So these are the non-negotiables, which is why I always recommend any job seeker to write down what those non-negotiables are and then what aspects you're negotiable. So it's interesting. So you're basically we base decisions based on our previous experiences, because as human beings, that's how we learn which berries to not eat, you know, which animal to run from and which one to capture. You know, this is what makes us human, isn't it? So there's a large part of that a feeling that we get. I mean, how much of what we decide is based on logic and how much is what makes us feel? Because sometimes you can come away from an interview and think, that just felt great, they made me feel really special, they obviously really want to hire me. But is it a logical feeling?
I would say it's a mix, actually. I cannot tell you in percentages how it is, but typically I would say it's based on the feeling and you know, what that interview or that person or how that person made us feel. That's how you make decisions. I mean, I don't know actually what we are talking about, that the recruiters or the candidates, because it really depends. I think, you know, there are certain phases of the hiring process when the recruiter makes decision, and there are certain phases of the recruitment process when the candidate makes decision.
Okay.
And that also, you know, depends on who's making decision and at what stage. But typically people make decisions based on how the person makes you feel, and also how they, you know, present themselves. Maybe if they do a test, how they do a test. Like, it's many different aspects, actually.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there are so many ways to skin a cat. I don't know if you have that expression in Lithuania.
We have
there are. Yeah, which is horrible. I hate that expression. But it's true. And I think if you know, you've hired for your companies in the past. I've obviously partnered in the recruitment industry for 24 years. There is no one size fits all. Sometimes I get a company and they literally they'll make an offer on the spot to a candidate. The candidate accepts, and I'm like, whoa, what just happened there? And there was no logic, there was no competency, there was no presentation. It was just they both made each other feel like they wanted to work there, they wanted to hire them. So,
but do you think it's a good approach as a recruiter? Would you say it's a good...
I do get asked that by some people in the market who know that this particular company do that. And I think if it works for them, and those people that then start there are happy in that role, which a lot of them are, their actual tenure of staff is really good, their attrition is really low, it obviously works for them. And then I have other companies where it might be, you know, a telephone screening, and then a Teams call, and then a face-to-face, and then it might be an HR-based competency interview, and then it might be a business plan or meet the team. And actually, I can also see why that can feel like you're really getting to know people, and you're right, really digging down on the sort of full 360 of them. But it can also potentially put candidates off that it's so elongated. So
I mean, I would say probably it's best to always a bit cool down and make a decision after the interview, not make it on a spot. Though I'm not saying, I mean, also making on a spot sometimes may feel a bit desperate, like you are just, you know, emotional, you're rushed with your decisions. So I would still recommend to probably, you know, end the call, give it a day, and then respond. Also, I think overall, it just like making decisions and deciding who to hire. It should be very thoughtful process. But at the end of the day, 50% chance is always that you're going to be unlucky with hiring, like no matter how in-depth your process is, right? Like this is like flipping a coin. As recruiters, we do a lot of work. We always try to, you know, do the whole vetting part clearly, like nurturing and everything else. But still, there's this chance that, because there are things that you cannot evaluate. Like you cannot evaluate the work ethic. You just see that as they work. You cannot evaluate their consistency in performance. Like these are the things that are hard to measure.
Yeah, I've never really thought about that before. Wow, that's intriguing. Okay, so given your provenance as a neuroscientist, obviously, but you've worked your way through and you've hired people yourself, how have you personally experienced the best hiring processes where you've seen people at interview, we'll talk about the process, and then seen them absolutely thrive in the role?
Well, I know we also briefly talked about hiring people similar to you, right? I mean, but that tends to work for me because I always look for the work ethic more than anything. I try to formulate questions based on, you know, how they work, how they approach difficult situations, how they stay consistent, organized, like all of those small things. Having good process is important. It's crucial. I always say have, you know, several people provide insights, so it's as objective as possible. Having a practical assessment always makes sense. So yeah, I think process is important, but also very clearly knowing what your non-negotiables are, what kind of person you're looking for. And if you know that, if you have that in mind, it will be easier to kind of match the person you're interviewing against your criteria.
So you do hire clones? That's interesting. Or you do or you don't. Do you purposefully go out to find a mini you?
No, not purpose. No, not
Okay.
on purpose. I mean, I don't think you can find a clone, a person very similar to you. There are certain aspects of a person that resemble you, maybe, for example, how they work or how they answer a certain question. But from the personality perspective, it's very difficult to find someone who's like you. You know,
Yeah.
we like to do DISC assessments. I don't know if you ever heard about them.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can like a person and they will have a completely different personality than I do, which
Yeah.
means that in many cases they will approach the situation in a different angle, but the work ethic might be similar,
Yeah.
which means they are going to be very responsible, you know, accountable, consistent, and so on.
I think we're in dangerous territory if anyone listening as a leader is hiring on a clone strategy, because first of all, you're totally disregarding what a true diversity and inclusion strategy means.
Exactly.
But on the flip side of that, we as human beings tend to be attracted to those that we feel a connection to, and that's largely around why I think that's where historically companies have hired in their model. You know, they've hired similar people from similar degrees or similar, you know, we've always hired people from telesales or we've always hired people from this university, but actually, you're definitely not creating an inclusive strategy for hiring future talent pools, but B, you're not complementing. That's something we've not yet talked about. So I'll talk about Shannon, who will be producing this episode, and she loves it when I share her name. You know, Shannon, if you met Shannon now, 5 years in, she works in a very similar way to me. Her work ethic is, without a shadow of a doubt, phenomenal. I mean, I literally have to tell her to take a day off. Her integrity, all the things that I hold really dear to what you've just been talking about there. And yet personality-wise, she is very different to me. She would never run a podcast like this. She's happy to be behind the scenes. You know, she's, you know, very different in personality from that point of view, but we share values. We share very similar values. So it's more focusing on that than the clone aspect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my business partner is exactly the same. We have the same work ethic. What is work ethic? I think that's the first thing that the business have to decide. What is a work ethic that they accept? You know, responsibility, accountability, to what extent, then consistency, creativity, like all of those things. And maybe something that I would give as an advice, like if, for example, you do personality assessments, let's say you're looking for a project manager, don't think that good project manager is a person who has, let's say, the I or something else, like as a result in this. It's not about that. They can have different personalities and still be great at their job. I think it more comes down to their work ethic, and how they approach it, and how responsible and organized they are.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And very often I think that gets smoke screened away. I don't think people talk about that because maybe they're afraid of putting somebody off, that this is what the expectation is. We're not talking about working 24 hours a day. We're talking about the way you work smart and the way how productive you are in the time that you have. That's really interesting, actually. So obviously, like I say, it's so hard to pinpoint our audience, but we tend to think it's two lots of people. One is leaders running teams or running companies. The other is recruiters who might be at the start of their career or on their upward journey. What would your top tips be for the leadership pool in terms of how do they ensure for their businesses they have the best decision-making process? And then how do those job seekers, those recruiters coming through, make sure they know how to play a role?
Okay, I'm going to try to put my thoughts straight, but I always think that, to make a decision is not difficult if you have all the information in hands, right? If you have all of the information that you need to make a decision, yes or no, it's easy. So the question is more about how do I get all of that information? And that means you need to understand better who you need to bring on board, what values they have to share, what work ethic they need to have, what are the non-negotiables in terms of experience, skills, knowledge, and everything else. Like if you get that part right, if you understand clearly who you need, then choosing between A and B is going to be easy because you'll know exactly who needs that. For recruiters, it's the same thing. For recruiters, I always say to be very successful in interviews, you need to develop two skills. One, you need to be able to ask lots of follow-up questions because people will tell you things intentionally or unintentionally that are not necessarily the true representation of reality.
True.
And the second skill is you need to be able to make decisions based on each answers. So basically, whatever they say, you need to process that fast and see, Does that make sense? Is it logical, or do I need a follow-up question? So I would say this would be a good starting point. And for recruiters, having a good process always is important. Keeping it as objective as possible is important. And I think as long as you kind of do that, I'm going to be successful.
I just want to pick up on something actually, and this shows I'm actually going to, by the very notion of what I'm saying, prove what I'm about to say. You need to be an active listener. So if your potential employer is sat there talking about, this is the succession plan, these are the promotion prospects, take on board what Erika's just said to you. You're going to process that information and then actually ask questions back specifically about that. So what are the milestones for me to get to that? What will the trigger points be? What if I'm doing X, Y, and Z, but I'm not doing A, B, and C? Really actively listen. And I think I know, having done 24 years in recruitment, that what can happen in a decision-making process from either side, but let's focus on the job seeker, is that they're so fixated on being, this great candidate that they forget to actually participate in the listening part. They're waiting for the next question instead of listening. So I think that's a really good point you've just made, Erika. I think that's really useful. And obviously recruiters listening, you can then impart this to your candidates as well. This is all, about cascading it down into the industry. This has been really, really exciting. So let's talk about your plans for the future. You cover a global audience. Where's your community? Where are you focusing on?
Yeah, so actually I'm working with the international clients, Europe, US mainly. And I'm also recruiting international people, mainly remote. So that's, I think, my specialty. And we only, to be honest, we only focus on marketing companies and e-commerce companies. So very, very niche, very, very.
I love how niche it is, but that's great because a large part of our audience are based in America. So you'll be having people clicking through. So we'll make sure everybody can have full visibility. You have been absolutely delightful. And I'd just like to say a very big thank you to the electrician that we know is in the background, who managed to not use the drill the whole time we were recording. You have been truly wonderful. And I'm so pleased that you reached out, and you've been a great guest for the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope we'll get a chance to record another episode sometime in the future.
We will. You take care. Thank you.